it's Grifflicious.
Alright, before I even dive into this video, I want to preface everything I'm about to say with a huge disclaimer. All of the key bindings and settings I use are things that work for me, so please keep that in mind and realize how subjective a lot of this is going to be. What my intention for this video is to highlight some examples of ways I've tried to make my key bindings work more efficiently for me in PUBG and perhaps guide you in ways in which you could do the same for you. I think everyone has things that feel more natural or more comfortable to them, so let's check out some of the things that have helped me suck just a little less at PUBG. Before we get into the key bindings section, I want to take a moment and express the importance of a balanced mouse sensitivity. I know not everyone has the luxury of a large mouse pad area, but if you do, I would strongly encourage an extra large or oversized mouse pad if you're looking to take PUBG a little bit more seriously. The reason being is due to things like the weapon recoil and how much more room is required at times to be able to compensate for said recoil. Fortunately, it's a relatively small investment that can have a pretty big impact on your gameplay. So when it comes to finding a balanced sensitivity, a good rule for this is determining how much movement you feel should be necessary to turn your character's head a full 90 degrees in either direction. I know for myself and many others, a good standard for this would be a full swipe from one side of your mouse pad to the other. Doing so would have your camera move a full 180 degrees, which in game means you know without question what motion you need to make in order to turn your character completely around if need be. In terms of individual sensitivities in game, again, go with whatever feels comfortable to you. I like to use a lower sensitivity because, for my preference, I feel like I have more control when I'm trying to pinpoint shots. I also like to try to keep it consistent across the board so that way each one of the optics ends up feeling relatively the same when I'm using them. Now, when it comes to key bindings, I prioritize my ability to move my character in any situation above all other things, which means if I can help it, I do very little to take my fingers off the WASD movement keys. I'm certain this is a holdover from my console days where I switched to bumper jumper in Halo or tactical controls in Call of Duty because it meant I could have the full range of motion of my character without needing to take my thumbs away from the analog sticks. So when it came to PUBG and leaning being a very important mechanic to master, I never felt like Q or E for leaning was the most efficient way to do it. So I looked at all the other resources that I had and I noticed that I had two buttons on my mouse where my thumb rested. At that point, I quickly chose to bind my left lean to the forward button and the right lean to the back button. Sticking with the theme of prioritizing movement, I looked at the other movement commands and I tried to see what else I could optimize. Jumping in PC games has always been spacebar, so there was really no reason to reinvent the wheel for that one. So that still left sprint, prone, and crouch. Sprint by default is the left shift key, which again feels like the best place for it, although I would advocate having sprint on toggle instead of hold. I did decide to leave prone on the Z key, however, because I felt that if you were in a situation where you were going to go prone, you were probably doing so in an effort to not be seen and therefore wouldn't need to move a whole lot. So all that was left was crouch, being on the C key. This was a pretty important change for me because almost every one of my gunfights, I use crouch just before I start shooting to tighten up the spray and make my recoil easier to control. Since hitting C would take my fingers away from any potential movement options, I looked at how my hand rested on the keyboard and realized that the left Alt key made the most sense for me. So I bound it as crouch and then used C for my free look. From this point, I just started taking inventory of all the different actions I took throughout the game and then ranked them on a list of priority. Things like changing the weapon's rate of fire was something I knew I would have to do quickly should I need to do it, so I went ahead and used my unused Q key and bound it to that. Then once they introduced the candid sight, I put that on E for the same reason. Then there are things like auto run being on the equals key that didn't make a ton of sense to me, so I decided to put that on the tilde key just above the tab button since it wasn't doing anything anyway and it saved me from having to reach across my keyboard. And with that in mind, I started looking at all the other key bindings that took up the right half of my keyboard and I figured out ways to shorten the distance to press them or find other buttons I could use. The map key, for instance, was one I pressed dozens of times each game and I got really tired of reaching over and pressing M for it. So instead, I bound it to my mouse wheel click, which works great because, again, it's not being used for anything and it just adds to the overall convenience. A fun tip for this though, if you're somebody who doesn't like listening to the plane as it flies in or you feel the need to mute the overwhelming noise from the red zone, having your mouse wheel click as M makes muting in-game audio very easy to do by holding control and clicking your mouse wheel. When it was all said and done, I just tried to make as many quality of life changes as I could, like trying to find a way to incorporate the throwable wheel or the healing item wheel, so that a way if I did have to use them, I didn't have to press as many keys to try to use those items. But really what this video boils down to is efficiency and preference. I know I opened with this, but based on the nature of the content here, I want to make sure and really emphasize how your personal preference should trump any key bindings or sensitivity tips I or anybody else gives you. You should always play the game the way you feel the most comfortable to do so. There's certainly no reason to break or change something if it works for you. More than anything, I only hope to encourage players to look at their key bindings more critically and perhaps find creative solutions to any problems they might be struggling with. You shouldn't let the game hold you back if you can help it.